In this video, you will be able to describe the patient preparation requirements for radiography of the cervicothoracic, explain how to position a patient for a lateral cervicothoracic view, summarize the technical settings and patient instructions necessary to produce a diagnostic image, identify major structures seen on the radiograph, list your evaluation criteria as it relates to the image.
Demonstrating for you the lateral projection of the cervicothoracic region, also known as the swimmer's technique. The swimmer's technique is done when you've done a lateral C-spine and you're unable to see the C7-T1 junction. The swimmer's technique can either be done supine or upright, depending on the condition of your patient. Patient assessment begins with the requisition.
Once you've received your requisition, you're going to be able to attain a clinical history of your patient. When you go out to the grading room, you're going to bring your patient in, and it's important to make sure that you get 2 patient identifiers, either your date of birth or your medical record number. Once you have done that, you begin to change your patient. Now let's go get our patient.
After the patient has entered the room, verify the patient's identity using a minimum of 2 identifiers, such as full name, date of birth, or medical record number. If the patient doesn't know their medical record number, always be sure to check the wristband given to them by the facility. Obtain any relevant clinical history from the patient, including onset, duration, or alleviating factors. Lastly, explain the procedure to the patient and what is to be expected upon completion.
Scuba Steve. Hello, my name's Hannah. I'll be doing your x-ray today.
Hi.
Can I verify your first and last name
Scuba Steve,
and your medical record number?
3464380.
Perfect. All right, what brings you in today?
I was free cage diving with sharks out in Bodega Bay, and one just really snuck up in my periphery, and I turned like that, actually in my neck, to see it. I must have whipped too hard, and it's just been hurting ever since.
Oh, wow, that was pretty scary. I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah.
All right, how long has it been bothering you?
It's happened about 2 days ago.
Okay, and anything that makes it feel better or worse or
It's just kind of like a generalized pain.
general pain? All right, is it a sharp pain?
It's kind of a throbbing.
Throbbing? Okay, perfect. Well, we're going to do a projection of your neck, okay? So it's just going to be one view, but I do need you to take everything from the waist up off, and you can leave your flippers on, but your goggles and mask and your snorkel has to come off, okay?
Okay.
All right, here's again.
Before any procedure, you'll want to ensure that your exam room is ready to welcome your next patient. Complete the following before the patient arrives to the room. First, make sure that the room looks neat and organized by putting away all devices used from the previous exam. Make sure all equipment is wiped down with a disinfectant. And finally, be prepared for your upcoming exam by having any specific items that you will need nearby and ready to go.
While your patient is changing, you're going to want to set up your equipment and tidy up your room from the previous patient. All set. For this projection, you're going to be using a 10 by 12 IR. You're going to place it in your wall bucky like so. Then you're going to want to align your tube. This projection is done at 40-inch SID, and you're going to want to detent to your wall bucky. Turn your tube at a 90-degree angle. And bring it in to 40.
So now that our room is all set up, we're going to bring in our patient from changing. Scuba?
Please. Mr. Steve.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Steve. We're going to have you over here by the board. This can be done in a left or a right position. So I'm going to have you put your left shoulder up against the board. We want to make sure that the patient is in a true lateral position. So their mid-coronal plane is going to be perpendicular to the grid. And we also want to make sure that the mid-coronal plane is centered to the grid as well.
All right, now from here, the arm that's closest to the IR is going to be raised above the head, and then the forearm is going to sit on top of the head. From here, we're going to rotate the shoulder that's away from the IR slightly anterior, and the arm closest to the IR is going to get pushed posterior. And then we're going to depress the shoulder that's away from the IR. So now that our patient is in position, we're going to bring around our tube. Okay. Again, we're going to make sure that the mid-coronal plane is centered to the grid. And for this projection, we're looking in particular at the intervertebral joint space between C7 and T1. So to find the bony landmark for that centering space, we're going to either look for the vertebral prominence, or it's going to be 2 inches above the jugular notch. Okay, so it's going to be about here. Okay, you want to make sure that your Wolbachie is aligned to the tube. And then from there, again, make sure the shoulder is dropped. Typically for this projection, we're going to be using a perpendicular central ray. However, if our patient is unable to depress their shoulder enough to clear that intervertebral joint space, so we're going to add a 3 to 5 caudal degree angle. Now that our patient is in position, our last couple of steps with positioning, we just want to make sure our collimation is good. It's a 10 by 12 collimation. We can bring it in just a little bit since we don't need that much light in the back of the neck. And then we're going to place a marker in the collimated field of view. And then before we head to do our technical factors, we're going to place a shield to shield the gonads.
Technical factors for the lateral cervicothoracic swimmer's technique include the use of a 10 by 12 imaging plate, an image receptor placed lengthwise, a 40-inch source to image distance, a large focal spot, and KVP or kilovoltage peak, which controls the quality and penetrating power of our beam, is typical to be 95. Our mass, which controls the quantity of photons in our beam, is usually 28 mass for digital radiography and 65 mass for computed radiography.
After our patient is properly positioned, it's time to get our technical factors. We're going to grab a caliper and we're going to measure part thickness. It's important to make sure when you are measuring that you have one part of the caliper here where the central ray enters and the other part against the IR. Just like this. This part thickness measures at 26 centimeters. Now it's time to go put it into our console. Now that we have found that part thickness was 26 centimeters, it's time to put it into our console. You're going to head over to your console. You're going to make sure that you are on the proper receptor, wall receptor. You have a large focal spot. Your AAC is set and turned off because we're manually putting in a technique. Then patient size you can leave as normal. You're going to head over to the cervical and you're going to choose the cervical swimmer's view. You'll now look into your technique chart. Because the swimmer's view is very similar to the lateral projection of the cervical, you can still use that same technique. It's important to keep in mind that your range of KVP and masses is going to vary for different people and different equipment that you're using at your facility. You'll come on over here. And a lateral cervical is a 85 kVp, so you'll enter 85 into your technique. You're going to come on over to mass, and because the thickness was 26, we're going to choose 18 mass. And 18 mass. Now that our patient is properly positioned, we've entered a proper technique, it's time to give some breathing instructions. For this projection is suspend respiration. When you give breathing instruction, it's very important that you give clear, concise instructions to your patient. Before exposing, it's also important to make sure that everyone is out of the room before exposing. Charlie, can you please leave the room? Now that our patient is properly positioned, we've entered a proper technique, everyone is clear of the room, it's time to expose. Mr. Steve, please hold your breath.
To make sure that everything goes swimmingly for the radiologist, after completing your image of the cervicothoracic region using the swimmer's technique, you're going to want to double check everything is up to par by going through your evaluation criteria, which are as follows. Evidence of proper collimation and presence of the side marker placed clear of the anatomy of interest. Adequate X-ray penetration through the shoulder region, demonstrating the lower cervical and upper thoracic vertebra not appreciably rotated from the lateral position. Humeral heads are minimally superimposed on the vertebral column, and bony trabecular detail and surrounding soft tissues are shown clearly.
It's important to make note of the important structures seen on your radiograph. All 7 cervical vertebrae will be seen, T1 will be visualized, and the C7-T1 joint space will be open and centered to the radiograph. The clavicle nearest to the image receptor will be elevated, and the clavicle farthest from the image receptor will be depressed. The humeral heads will be seen, but it will be slightly off of the vertebrae, clearing it from superimposition.
If for whatever reason your patient can't stand up, this exam can be done supine. The centering point, collimation, and breathing instructions all remain the same. The only difference is they're laying down and you have them walk their outside hand down their thigh to get that shoulder out of the view and open up the space between C7 and T1. To recap, before exposing, I always want to go through my stamps. S stands for SID, 40, the exact same as standing up. T for technique, we measured from the point that the central ray is entering to the table. A for alignment, which is also the same as upright at the C7, T1 area. M for marker, we place that on the IR inside the table bucky. P for patient positioning, we have her lined up with everything. And S for shield, which we have placed on top of her arm.
Okay, Hamlet, so for a positioning tip on the swimmer's view, you can get your bucky and tube in alignment into place, and then give the patient some, the handle here for support for their arm. And then once they're into position, it's easier for them to hold still.
Now they're ready to dive on into the swimmer's view. A couple helpful tips that we've gathered from some licensed technologists around the area are make your exposure at the end of expiration to keep the humeral head out of the field of view, and then also have the arm furthest from the IR put behind the back to help get it a little down. This will really make a splash with the radiologist with how clean your images look.